All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some really cool stuff. Actually, this one comes courtesy of you, the listeners. You sent in some entries from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Yeah, and we're really going to try to act as philosophers today, not just kind of explain and summarize, but really grapple with the ideas of Jean-Baptiste Du Bos.
Yeah, Du Bos. I don't know about you, but I had never really heard of him before.
No, not a household name.
Not a household name exactly. But born 1670, died in 1742. He was French and like a true Renaissance man. He was into everything. Antiquarian, historian, diplomat, aesthetician, and philosopher, of course. So he Raymond shifted the way we think about art and beauty and knowledge even, and our mission is to understand just what he did and why it mattered, why it still matters even, and hopefully uncover some really interesting and surprising ideas along the way.
Yeah, and he had some really intriguing ideas.
He did, and we're going to get to those. But first, let's lay some groundwork. Like, who was this guy? Besides just listing off his many, many interests.
Right. Well, one thing that's really interesting about Du Bois is that he was very much a part of his time. I mean, he wasn't just an academic sitting in an ivory tower.
Oh, yeah, no, he was totally in the mix, like super engaged with the intellectual currents of the day. And speaking of currents, did I mention he was involved in the quarrel of the ancients and moderns?
Ah, yes, that's right. That big debate about, are the classics the ultimate standard or have we, surpassed them?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's already, thinking about these big questions early on.
And he was friends with some really important thinkers of the time. People like Nicolas Flamel-Dispro, Charles Perrault, Pierre Bial.
Oh, yeah, that's a pretty impressive crew to be running with. Bale especially. I mean, he seems to have really influenced Du Bois. And even Jean-Jacques Rousseau, though that friendship didn't quite last, apparently.
There's a story there.
Yeah, I wonder what happened. But, you have to think that all his, varied experiences really informed his philosophy. He traveled all over Europe as a diplomat, met folks like John Locke. I mean, that's got to shape how you see the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine negotiating a peace treaty between the Netherlands and France, and then later on getting elected to the Académie Française. That's, a huge deal.
That's a big deal. Becoming the perpetual secretary, this guy was plugged in.
Yeah, and beyond that, he was super productive. He wrote about a lot of
Well,
things.
he wrote about everything. His first book, History of Four Gordians. You ever heard of that one?
Rings a bell.
Well, he argued for the existence of four Gordian emperors based on coins.
Oh, coins.
Mhm.
Bold move.
It didn't really pan out, but then he wrote about English interests in a war, then a history of this alliance against Venice, which Voltaire actually liked, by the way. So, he had his moments.
He wasn't always wrong.
Not always wrong, haha. And then a history of the French monarchy, a very critical history. He argued, get this, that the Franks were invited to rule Gaul, which Montesquieu did not appreciate.
He got around. But the book that we really want to talk about today, the one that made his name in aesthetics, is Critical Reflections on Poetry and Painting.
Right, his 1719 masterpiece. So what's the big idea? What's he getting at?
Well, he starts with this basic question. Why do we get so much pleasure from art?
Yeah.
What's the source of that striking pleasure, as he calls it? And his answer is imitation.
Okay, imitation. So art imitates the real world, and that's enjoyable.
Yeah, he's saying that art imitates objects, actions, events in the world. And in doing so, it kind of arouses similar emotions in us to what we'd feel if we were actually experiencing those things, but a less intense version.
Ah, okay. So a painting of a raging storm might make me feel a little bit of awe and maybe even fear, but I'm not actually, about to be swept away by the waves.
Right, exactly. And he distinguishes between different types of signs in art. Natural signs, which are like painting and sculpture, even music, because they represent things through resemblance. And then artificial signs, like language, which he associates mostly with poetry, because they're just conventions.
Right, like a painting of a tree looks like a tree, but the word tree doesn't look anything like a tree. We just, decided that that's what that sound means.
Exactly. And this leads him to consider which art form is best at stirring up emotions. At first he thinks painting, because those natural signs have such immediate impact. But then he's like, actually, poetry, especially when it's combined with music and acting, like opera, that can be even more powerful.
So opera is like the ultimate emotional roller coaster, according to Du Bos.
I think you'd agree with that. And this brings us to one of the most interesting parts of his work, the paradox of tragedy. Why do we enjoy art that makes us feel bad?
Right. Why do we watch a play where terrible things happen or look at a painting of, suffering and violence and actually find it moving? Engaging.
It's a puzzle, right? And Du Bois offers a couple of answers. First, he says that those unpleasant emotions we feel from art, they're just weaker and less lasting than the real deal. And he brings in this idea of ennui, like this kind of deep boredom with existence. He thinks we'd rather feel even bad emotions through art than just feel nothing. Hume, by the way, kind of agreed with this part.
So it's like better to feel sad watching a play than just be, existentially bored. It's kind of a bleak view of humanity.
Yeah, a little bit. But later, Du Bois is influenced by Aristotle's idea of catharsis, and he proposes another answer. Art actually purges those bad emotions. We see them depicted faithfully, and that makes us resolve to avoid them in our own lives. Like watching Medea go on her vengeful rampage might make us less likely to, fly off the handle ourselves.
So art as a kind of emotional vaccine.
In a way, yeah. And the entries emphasize how important the idea of sentiments was for Du Bois. He really made that a key term in aesthetics.
Sentiments. What did he mean by that?
Basically, he's talking about those first immediate responses we have to things that affect us. Those first emotional reactions. They're what we experience in everyday life, but when they're aroused by art, it's like a fainter version.
So if I see a lost puppy in the street, I might feel a huge surge of sympathy. But if I see a painting of a lost puppy, it's like a gentler version of that same sentiment.
Exactly. And then he connects this to his idea of the sense of beauty. He actually says that we have a sixth sense to judge beauty, a sense that allows us to make judgments about the imitation of beautiful things.
A sixth sense. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and he even compares it to taste. Like when you taste something, you just know right away if you like it or not. You don't need to analyze the chemical composition or anything.
Right. It's just a direct experience.
Exactly. He thinks beauty is kind of like that. We just sense it.
Interesting. So another term that comes up a lot is vraisemblance, which is verisimilitude. Basically, like how believable the art is.
Yeah, he says that art should be consistent with our knowledge of, customs and habits and all that, whatever it depicts. Like if you're painting a scene from ancient Rome, the clothes and the buildings should look, like what we know about ancient Rome. But he's not saying everything has to be totally realistic. Even, fantastical elements, what he calls the marvelous, can be vraisemblable.
Okay, so if there's a god or goddess in an opera, that can still be believable, even if we don't literally believe in those gods and goddesses.
Right, as long as it makes sense within the world of the opera itself. And he sees vraisemblance as a means to an end. It's a way to help arouse those sentiments we talked about.
So the goal isn't just to be realistic, it's to move us emotionally. Now, this all leads him to criticize what he calls rationalist criticism, those critics who judge art by reason and rules.
Yeah, he calls those guys geometrical critics. And he's not a fan. He thinks judging art is like tasting a ragu. You don't use, geometry to figure out if it's good. You just taste it and see how you react. Same with art. It's about feeling.
That's a great analogy. So then what about taste? If it's all about sentiment, does that mean everyone's opinion is equally valid? Like, is someone who loves, I don't know, Thomas Kinkade just as right as someone who loves Michelangelo?
Well, Du Bois knew this was a tricky issue. He recognizes that people have different tastes. Like, some people might prefer paintings that focus on color, while others might be more drawn to paintings that are really expressive. Just like some people like champagne and some people like Spanish wine,
Right.
But he also proposes this idea of the test of time. He says that the works that have continued to please audiences over long periods, they're probably the ones that have real artistic merit. Like, he points to ancient Greek and Roman poets. They've stood the test of time.
So if something's still popular centuries later, there's got to be something to it, right?
Yeah.
More than just personal preference.
Exactly. And while he acknowledges that art can sometimes impart knowledge, he's really adamant that this isn't its main purpose. The real goal of art is to arouse sentiments, to make us feel things. And he talks about how the artist themselves needs to feel those emotions really intensely. He calls this enthusiasm, almost like a kind of madness.
The crazy artist. Classic. So what about that whole ancients and moderns thing? Where did Du Bois land?
Well, he's kind of in the middle. He says modern sculptures haven't surpassed the ancients, and he thinks it's likely the same is true for painting, but it's hard to say for sure because we don't have a lot of ancient paintings left.
Makes sense.
But when it comes to poetry, he thinks the ancients definitely win, although he does say that modern science has surpassed the ancients.
So a mixed bag. And finally, he gets into this idea of the physical causes of genius, which sounds very, I don't know, enlightenment-y.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
He totally rejects that old idea that genius comes from divine inspiration. He wants to find, like, natural explanations.
So he's looking for causes, right? Physical
Mm.
causes.
Yeah, things like having a well-formed brain, or even stuff like the climate you live in, the air quality, soil, your diet. He even says that England doesn't produce great painters because it's too cold there.
Blaming the weather for a lack of artistic talent, huh?
Yeah.
That's tough to say. So those are some of the big ideas and critical reflections, but what kind of impact did it actually have? What's his legacy?
Oh, he was huge. Johann Georg Sulzer actually called him the first of modern critics to construct a theory of art upon general principles. He wasn't just offering opinions, he was trying to build a whole system.
Wow. So he laid the groundwork for how we think about art today.
He really did.
Hmm.
And in France, Voltaire was a big fan. He picked up on Du Bos's ideas about subjectivity and the way climate can influence, national character.
Makes sense. Voltaire being Voltaire.
Right. And Du Bos was super influential on Diderot and D'Alembert's Encyclopedia, especially articles on fine arts. Even Rousseau, even though they had that falling out, he was influenced by Du Bos on, like, the emotional impact of theater. And
Yeah.
then there's Charles Bateau and the whole resemblance theory of musical expression. That was influenced by Du Bos, too.
So basically, he was everywhere. His fingerprints are all over 18th century French thought. What about in England?
Oh, his influence crossed the channel, too. James Harris, he wrote this book called Three Treatises that pretty much just summarizes a bunch of Du Bos's ideas. But even more importantly, he had a big impact on David Hume.
Hume, really?
Yeah, Hume actually owned a copy of Du Bos's book, and he talks about Du Bos in his essay of Tragedy.
Yeah.
And there's a good argument to be made that Du Bos also influenced Hume's of The Standard of Taste.
How's
Well, like that whole thing about having an internal sense of beauty and how we shouldn't judge art based on rigid rules. And then there's even evidence of Du Bos in Hume's treatise of human nature, especially those parts about how art evokes emotions and that whole thing about ennui, the boredom with existence.
So Du Bos's ideas were making their way into some really important works of philosophy.
Absolutely. And then in Germany, he also had a big impact. Kind of like in France, he helped move things away from that super rationalist way of thinking about art criticism.
Okay, so breaking free from just pure reason.
Yeah, and thinkers like Johann Jakob Reidinger, Baumgarten, Herder, Lessing, Mendelssohn, Winkelmann, they were all influenced by him in one way or another. Some agreed with him, some argued against him, but they were all dealing with the ideas he put forward.
He was setting the terms of the debate.
Exactly. And Lessing even translated part of Critical Reflections into German, so it was definitely circulating.
Wow, so we've got France, England, Germany. This guy was having a major impact across Europe. Now, the entries also talk about his contributions to, like, epistemology and the philosophy of science, which maybe isn't as well known.
Right, but it's really important to understanding his whole philosophy. He was a big part of the move away from Cartesian rationalism in France, and he advocated for an empirical approach to both art and science.
So just like he thought our judgments about art should be based on experience and feeling, not abstract reason, he thought the same was true for science.
Exactly. He specifically says that judging art, like tasting a ragu, is empirical.
Hmm.
It's based on sensory experience, not on reason or geometrical principles. He also criticized those big, speculative scientific systems, the kind that start with, like, a priori assumptions. He much preferred the approach of groups like the Royal Society and the Academy of Sciences, who were focused on actually verifying facts through experiments.
Like Francis Bacon and all that.
Exactly. He was all about the evidence of I have seen rather than I have concluded. And he points to Harvey's discovery of blood circulation as a prime example of knowledge gained through, actual experience and observation.
Right, you gotta see it to believe it.
Yeah, and he even says that young doctors, even if they start out as kind of rationalists, wanting to apply these big theoretical systems, once they actually start practicing medicine, they inevitably become empiricists. They have to. Same with engineering, navigation, any field where practical experience really matters.
You can't just theorize your way out of a shipwreck. And he talked about how the major scientific discoveries came about, right? Attributing them to, like, new experiences and observations, not just thinking things through in your head.
Yeah, he talks about stuff like the discovery of air pressure, the compass, the printing press, the telescope. All these things came about because people were experiencing and observing new things, expanding their knowledge of the world.
It's like, you gotta get your hands dirty.
Exactly. And even his ideas about the physical causes of genius, even though those are kind of outdated now, they came from the same empirical drive. He was trying to find material explanations, to see patterns, to understand genius based on what we could observe.
So it's all connected, even his, slightly strange ideas about genius being caused by the weather and stuff.
It's all part of his bigger project. And he even understood that scientific explanations, they always involve some guesswork. He said that scientific hypotheses, they're only ever probable to varying degrees. Again, he uses Harvey's theory as an example of a scientific truth that we accept based on a lot of evidence, not because it's absolutely certain.
So there's always some uncertainty.
Yeah, there's always some uncertainty. So we've really gone deep on Du Bos.
Hmm.
As we wrap up, what are the big takeaways? What do you think our listeners should remember about him?
I mean, he was foundational to how we understand aesthetics today. He shifted the focus from like strict rules to the importance of individual experience and sentiment. And he did it not just with art, but with science too. He challenged that whole rationalist way of thinking and championed this empirical approach, based on observation. And even if some of his specific theories, like the one about the weather and genius, might seem a little odd now, his emphasis on experience and our emotional responses, that's still super relevant today.
Yeah, he really was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. I think what really struck me was the tension he highlights between, the subjectivity of taste, like how we all have our own preferences, and his idea that the test of time. Like, how do we reconcile those two things? Is there some objective quality to art that goes beyond individual taste? Or is it just like a collective subjective appreciation that develops over time? It's something to think about.
Yeah, it really is. It makes you wonder if your own judgments about art are just like fleeting whims or if there's something more to it. And if you're curious to learn more about Du Bos, definitely check out his critical reflections. And if you want to explore some of those thinkers he influenced, Hume, Voltaire, Rousseau, that would be a fascinating deep dive too.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that thinkers from centuries ago can still spark really interesting conversations and make us think about those big questions. What is beauty? Why do we find things meaningful? What makes something truly captivating?
Big questions indeed. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the world of ideas.